these successive tidal waves of climate change, various collapses of the global economy, rising sea levels, more plastic in the sea than fish. You know, these things aren't going away. So one of the biggest challenges we face in future is mental health. If you put your hands in the soil, there's a bacterium called Mycobacillus vaccae, and it causes the brain to release serotonin. Good reason not to wear gloves when you're gardening, you know? So gardening physically does actually make people happier. When I first came across permaculture, I was staying with a friend in Lincolnshire, and we'd been doing green politics together, and that's also how I met my wife Nancy. And at some point we thought, we want to stop talking about this and we want to do it. And when I was staying at Joe's house, I found these two books. The Fintor Garden. This is about the intentional community in Morayshire in Scotland, famous for its focus on meditation and the amazing gardens they created in the caravan park there originally. And Dorothy, who was one of the original community, who could talk to the plant divas. Next to it I found this, Permaculture 1, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren's proposition for permaculture. Remember, at this point they hadn't really done it. They were saying this is what we need to do. So what I had in here was being enchanted by these amazing people and these beautiful photographs, and feeling that I couldn't do any of this because plant divas weren't talking to me, you know. And then in here, on, you know, self-printed, homemade paper almost, was all the things I was interested in. So renewable energy, social engagement, local trading, growing food, the importance of trees. So that set me off on the permaculture pathway, because this was telling me you can do this, which was the kind of message I was looking for, really. And so we came here in 1988 and bought an old stable block next door with another family, which was going to be an intentional community and became a disintentional non-community quite quickly. And they went away and we stayed here and bought this house next door, and we're still here. The house was built in 1948 in an old walled garden which has started in about 1690. But had largely been abandoned by the time we moved here, which was in 1988, and there was pretty much nothing left in the garden, and we have doubled the size of the house and turned it from something which was based on the original Scottish idea of energy efficiency. I was going to say inefficiency, which is wear lots of jumpers and eat lots of porridge, to now it's energy efficient. And we brought up our family here. Both our kids are married now and live elsewhere, and they're in their 30s. So in this garden, which is what people mostly see when they come here, it's been going for 31 years, since 1990. It is the oldest intentional food forest garden in the UK. There have been food forest gardens around the world for thousands of years, you know, from the Aztecs to the Chinese and so on. But this idea is a concept that you could apply in a cool, temperate climate like Scotland. Really only came to life in the 1970s, and it was the first land site in Scotland. So. It's not organic gardening, it's a design system. And I wrote The Permaculture Way, it's underneath here somewhere. This book, because I wanted to translate the designer's manual into something that was a bit easier to read and was more pertinent to Northern Hemisphere climate and culture. Bill was a lovely guy and I have immense respect for him, but he was a macho Australian male as well, you know, and that didn't always translate well wherever he went in the world. And so people kept saying, oh, you mean like organic gardening? And I kept saying, no, 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 no. And after like a couple of years of banging my head against a wall like that, I thought, time to see the light. And I wrote the Permaculture Garden. Because if people want it to be about gardening, it's a gateway. So I don't claim to be the cleverest permaculturist around. I don't claim to be the greatest of anything, really. But I suppose what we have discovered over time here is if you create the right habitat, the right things happen. You can hear birdsong all around us, hopefully. That's because we have created the right habitat. You saw the owl in the tree earlier. He sits there 3 metres from our sitting room window. You can go and talk to him. He just blinks at you, you know. This is because this is a right habitat for these people. And to me, all living creatures are people. We don't have sovereignty over the birds of the air or the worms in the soil. You know, they're all people, and they all lead their own way of existing. And what you get in a garden is that exemplified. Jeff Lawton says, anything you want to learn about life, you can learn in a garden. Somebody claims that Bill Mollison said it first. Doesn't matter. It's the message that counts, not the name on the envelope. And, you know, it's so true. Because when you're in a garden, you are connected with the living earth, the planet in all its glory. There was a programme on television last night and they were showing a field being harvested by a combine harvester and a tractor and trailer without any people. Robot driven, standing there with a laptop. What happens when we don't need people on the land anymore? You know, land is a good place to work, meaningful work, fresh air, not stuck indoors. And so we're driving more people to be sitting working at screens. It's crackers, you know. This whole point about permaculture is, you know, we have to stop relying on politicians to solve the world's problems because they don't. Instead of blaming them, we just need to get on with it ourselves, you know, and do what we can for ourselves and diminish the need to have government, you know. Farmers are not the enemy. You know, farmers have done an amazing job in this country. Between 1945 and 1975, they doubled production. And by the end of that time, the workforce was 10% of what it had been at the end of the Second World War. But the carbon expenditure on farm was 8 times greater. And that yield has been doubled again, 1975 to 2000. But at what cost? We have 2% left of the wildflower meadow we had in 1939. What does that do to species loss, you know? How wonderful to go and teach in Romania, which has probably got the greatest amount of wildflower meadow left of any country in Europe, and see kilometres of fields of beautiful wildflowers, mixed grasses and plants and herbs, and all that does for the health of livestock. You know, if you're expecting a cow or a sheep to live off Italian ryegrass, you know, it's like telling your children that they're only going to eat spaghetti. You know, it's insane. So watch what happens when you drop, when you have a polycultural farming system. Watch the veterinary bills drop. Watch the wildlife come back. Wake up to songs in the morning. The vertical dimension is what we miss in chemical farming. Not enough trees. Nobody's looking after the soil. In fact, they're killing the soil and losing it. We are losing 10 tonnes of topsoil per person on planet Earth every year right now. Not sustainable. How many people come and say, this is a mess? Well, yeah, but it's a deliberate mess, if that's what you think. When I see straight rows of plants with bare soil in between, I actually think that's a mess. It's actually about process. It's about how these things work together. The layers are one way of thinking about the architecture. So you're harvesting above and below. And one of the things I say to people here is, I'm sorry, I can only show you half the garden because it's the half underneath that you can't see that's doing most of the work, you know. There are different zones in the garden, and I do have a map with these all written on somewhere, but they're not necessarily obvious because they kind of blend in and out. So behind where you're sitting over there is an area of quite dense forest. So under that is shade tolerant species. So for example, if you want to grow comfrey for green manure, it doesn't mind being in the shade. Things like gooseberries don't mind being in the shade because they're naturally woodland plants. Strawberries are naturally woodland plants. So alpine strawberries are quite happy under there. Commercial type bred strawberries like a little more full sun. So away to my left here is a big apple tree which is a variety called Duke of Devonshire, and underneath that bed is all perennial vegetables. This bed on the other side of the pathway from it is annual vegetables. You see, the word forest doesn't actually mean trees, it means the king's hunting ground, from Norman French. So what we're really trying to do is use that kind of principle of making a hunter-gatherer situation. Forests do not consist of, natural forests, do not consist of straight rows of trees all the same species and all the same age. They have clearings in them. So this garden's got clearings in it, and that's where the annual vegetables are grown because they need more sun. But when you're planning the garden, you're planning what's going to stay. So you can move your annuals around to these clearings between. So the bed in front of me over there, this end of the bed is rhubarb. That bed is a bed of rhubarb that's been there 50 years. And people say, oh, you have to dig it up and replant it. No, just all the kids' dead pets were planted in there, fertiliser, and it just self-seeds. It's a variety called Victoria, which produces from March through to August every year. So it's a very good vitamin C for early in the season. So there's a lot of seasonality designed into things as well. One of the things we do on the yield record is note when things come, so we can think ahead for another time. Beyond that is more annuals. There's a bed down by the pond over there which is all perennial soft fruits and herbs, and scattered amongst these is various trees. Quite a lot of espalier over here, some cordons over there. This bit behind me here is wild. So throughout the garden there are little patches of wilderness. To the left of the pathway over here, it's wilderness. It's got lots of soft fruit in it, but we don't manage what's going on with the understory. Mulch it down from time to time. This allows places for butterflies and moths to breed and other insects, and it allows space therefore for birds to nest. So what you've got is your zone 5, your wilderness area, is scattered in pockets throughout the garden. Yeah. And this is part of the health of the system. So what you're relying on is the polyculture of the living creatures to do pest control. You don't have to work so hard. That's part of the point, is to reduce the amount of work that we have to do. And the end result, 800 square metres, fifth of an acre, 33 species of bird nest in this garden. At least 22 come for their lunch and another 20 come on their holidays. That's getting on for 80 species of bird in 800 square metres. I'm told there are 5,000 species of invertebrate in the garden. I don't know enough about invertebrates, but I still keep counting them. And fungi and trees. There's over 200 trees in this garden. There's getting on for 100 varieties of apple. You know, in May, there's 60 different species of plant in this garden you can eat in a salad. There's probably more that I haven't discovered yet. You know, peak yield in this garden is 1.25 metric tons of food. We're down a bit this year because we haven't got to feed visitors, so we don't have so much need of food, and the freezers are still full from last year. We've got cupboards full of stuff. We could probably feed ourselves for 6 months if we didn't even leave the house right now. And some things don't work. Not everything works, you know. Tried growing yin, Prunus avium, wild cherry. Go straight up to 8 metres, and the cherries are all on the top and the birds eat them all, and then they drop the seeds in your garden and you get random cherry trees everywhere, so cherry trees became firewood. After about 20 years we really felt that it was doing what we set out to do, so then we have had a much more lively programme of open days and so on. In a regular year we get maybe 1,000 visitors a year. So we've got a lot of experience of working with people and a lot of feedback from people as well. Everybody who comes into a classroom, be that virtual, real, garden, whatever, you know, they've got all of their life's experience behind them. So nobody comes through that gateway into this garden as an empty vessel waiting to be filled with my abundant knowledge, you know. They all come here with things I don't know, and so what we're trying to do in growing the understanding of permaculture and its usefulness is get people to share what they know, as much as coming together with us to look at something as a huge holistic system, and then we need to break it down into some component parts so we understand how it works before we stick it back together again, and then can operate it as a holistic understanding of the world we live in and our place within it to provide all of our needs, and in the process to care for all life on planet Earth, and to do something about social injustice along the way. What we're trying to do constantly is build our working capital to create surplus, not so we've got more than we need, and we do have more than we need here, and sometimes we struggle to find people to share it with, you know, but to have surplus that we can share with people who don't have it. So that might be surplus food, it might be meaningful work, it might be insight or understanding, it might be just time to listen, you know. And if we use more than our working capital, we diminish our ability to create that surplus. And you know, so one of the kinds of capital we have is health. If you wear yourself out and you're not being properly paid for what you're doing, and you get sick and you can't pay your bills, you've diminished your ability to help others because you can't help yourself. So it's you know, I think rather than blaming capitalism, we need to reclaim capitalism as a fair and just approach to those who have, being able to help those who have less, whatever that may be. So we're very blessed that so many people have come here over time, and many of those people have, as you suggested, come here on courses. Generally speaking, teaching here, we've taught permaculture design courses, we've taught forest gardening, we've taught food preservation as the main things that we have been able to share with people. There are other things where we have special interest and skills as well, for example in transport, but there's not been the same demand for those as taught subjects, so we tend to focus on the first three things there. People get very nervous about standing up and being counted, you know, because they think they might get it wrong. But this is, you have to make it a safe place, so that if they do get it wrong, it's a learning experience, you know, and you take from that. So you see, I worry about people who don't make mistakes because they're not trying to do anything new. you try to do new things, you will make mistakes. So the secret is try and make mistakes that aren't fatal, and try not to make the same mistakes over and over again. But we all do about some things in our lives. The principal gift that we could get from any experience in this site is kindness.